Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Security Boulevard webinar, brought to you by TechStrong. My name is Cody J. Brown, and I'll be moderating today's session. We have an exciting presentation ahead of us, but before we begin, I have just a few housekeeping notes. Today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the discussion, it will be made available to rewatch. You'll receive an email after the webinar concludes with a link to access the on-demand. We also want to hear from you, so please feel free to send in your questions at any time throughout the program by using the Q&A feature. We'll try to address as many questions as we can, so please be sure to send them in early. We also encourage discussion by using the chat tab. Feel free to let us know your thoughts or just tell us a quick hello. Finally, at the end of today's webinar, we have a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. Stick around to see if you're one of our 4 lucky winners today. At this point in time, I will turn the floor over to Junie to introduce our panel and kick off our discussion today.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar that looks at the OWASP Top 10 and beyond. My name is Junie Dinda. I'm the CMO at Secure Code Warrior, and I'm joined today by our CTO, Matthias Madou, and our guest panelists, Aaron Bedra from DRW and Ben Vogt from Nelnet. So we're looking forward to a very lively discussion. And if you have any questions as we're talking, please drop them into the question function that's indicated by the little question mark on the right hand of the screen. All right, before we get started, Aaron and Ben, thanks so much for joining us today. Can I ask you to just give a brief introduction about yourselves? Aaron, can you start?
Certainly. Yeah, so my name is Aaron Bedra. I have been doing software security and software development for a little over 20 years now. I've worked in retail commerce, healthcare, finance, kind of you name it, I suppose, as a consultant in both security and in software engineering, as a CTO, as a CISO. Have written programming languages and other things as well, and have written a couple of books on functional programming.
Excellent. All right, Ben?
My name is Ben Vogt. I am currently the cybersecurity manager over the offensive operations team here at Nelnet, which means I have under my purview application security and red teaming / pen testing. I've been in combination of IT and cybersecurity roles for about 20 years now. My background is in companies of all sizes, small businesses onto large enterprises and everything in between.
Excellent. Thank you. It's great to have you both here. All right, let's get going. So Matthias, to get us started, there's probably some people online who might not be as familiar basically with OWASP and the list. So if you can just give us a brief summary of the list, how often is the list updated? And then most importantly, are there any significant changes that we've seen in the newest release of the list? It's a three-parter.
Absolutely. I'll try to give a decent answer to that question. So OWASP is actually producing a list roughly every 3 years, and they gather data. They gather data from different companies that essentially scan applications, that do consulting for companies, and they look at vulnerabilities. So OWASP is aggregating a lot of data every 3-4-ish years. And they try to figure out, what is now the most important problem that we're facing in today's world. So way back in 2007, we had an OWASP Top 10. Up until now, the OWASP Top 10 2021. Does it differ a lot since a good decade ago? Maybe. It actually depends how you look at the particular list. Are still similar categories popping up? Absolutely. But of course, a great deal of information comes from the data that is used to collect to create that list. I would say back in the day, it was a very select number of organizations and companies that provided information to create that list. Today, I think we take more and different angles to software security. We see more manual interaction. We see more results coming in from threat modeling, humans trying to find problems in code. And all of that is aggregated in the 2021 OWASP Top 10. So maybe one notable thing for me, I thought way back in the day when we had the OWASP Top 10 that injection problems like SQL injection would be the #1 problem forever and ever. Well, guess what? That has changed. In 2021, that does no longer seem to be the case. It seems to have dropped to the third place, actually. So that is, for me, the main thing, if you can call it. I thought it would be there forever and ever. On the one hand, you would say, well, we've made a little bit of progress, but maybe we can discuss that in a later section. So where does it come from? Well, it's based on real data. Every 3 years, roughly every 3 years, it's updated. It has some notable changes in the 2021 OWASP Top 10. And I think it's a very good start for an application security program.
Great, thanks, Matthias. That's great to kick us off, and a great summary for everyone on the webinar. I think that there's definitely the increased focus on the vulnerabilities and the need to look beyond kind of these surface level bugs from that perspective. I'm going to flip it over to Aaron. Do you feel like these changes are pretty reflective of the challenges that we're seeing in software security today?
For me, it's kind of a yes and no. I see the OWASP Top 10 and all the good things that the OWASP Foundation does as kind of more axiomatic. They're foundational tools for building a software security program. I don't know that they're really indicative of all the problems you have around software security. There are things that I think are fundamental, like the organizational aspects, which is, how does the organization drive software security? How do they accept or reject, the security premise in general? How does the security organization prioritize this? How does the board prioritize this? There are kind of sociopolitical aspects to it, not just technical aspects, and I think are part of this. And on top of it, I'm really glad to see threat modeling, or I guess secure design, become one of the things. So design is such a big category of bugs, or I guess flaws, more commonly stated. But I think it's really important to have something that expresses design problems as a whole, not just specific vulnerabilities, but a larger class of problems. I expect in the next top 10 to see specific points of secure design start to manifest as individual components, much like the SQL injection and cross-site request forgery and other things that have kind of been on the list that are all kind of that class of vulnerabilities.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ben, do you want to weigh in on this, on the changes? Did anything really surprise you from this year's list?
I don't know that I want to say surprise. There typically is a pretty good representation of what we can expect across the discipline in general, reflected in this. It shows a maturation of some of the tools and some of the processes we've been running with for a very long time. So a lot of your SQL injection attacks, they haven't gone away. As mentioned, they're still here, right? But we have a lot of tools that have been developed over past a couple decades now, right? And they do a good job of detecting that stuff. And once it's detected, developers have a pretty good opportunity to, it's flagged for them, so they fix it, they remediate it, they move on. But that's a very shift right approach. It's nice to be reflecting things that are really more shifted left in the approach of a development lifecycle. So if you're planning things from the beginning to incorporate security as part of the design, you have a better chance of having a secure process, a secure application down the road, and not just trying to plug holes in the dam, right, as you find them with an automated scan at the end. I was happy to see a lot more focus on that in this rendition of the OWASP Top 10.
Okay, great. That makes sense. And so now let's think about the ranking for the developers team, kind of building off Aaron's point. So Matthias, should this impact developers on a day-to-day basis as they're thinking about the list and they're thinking about the work that they're doing?
So very good question. The way I look at it is, I think it's a really good starting point for developers, the OWASP Top 10. So if you're new to application security, hopefully you're not, but say you're new to application security and you want to dip your feet into what this is all about, I think it's a great way to get started. It's a great way to understand what is current, what today is really the problem with our software and what we're trying to remediate. But that's when you get started. Once you mature, or once the organization matures, I would say it's very important to look at what the problems really are within your own organization and trying to figure out, what is really the problem over here. To give a very simple example, if you do not have a database, well, SQL injection is not a thing for you. You know, it doesn't make sense to train all your developers and making sure they are really good at writing code that will not expose your database if you do not have a database. It doesn't make sense at all. So once you matures over time, I think it really makes sense to look at, hey, what are my scans telling me? What is my threat modeling telling me or us, the organization? And fine-tune really what developers need to know of based on real findings, based on real things in the software into what you're really finding in your organization. And I think that's just a process. And I think we all go through that. We all go through those stages in organizations where we start with doing something. And I think OWASP Top 10 is a great way to start. But then we mature over time and we figure out, okay, this is really what we need to focus on.
Got it. So it's something that can you like that you start with like a foundation or a baseline, and then it evolves over time depending on what your business would be. Do you see that, Ben and Aaron, kind of happening in your organizations as well? Like Ben, can you give us kind of the journey of your organization as they've been evolving their programs?
Absolutely. To me, OWASP Top 10 is table stakes, right? If you want to have any conversations for security, application security specifically, there has to be a common vernacular, a common terminology that all parties can understand. The OWASP Top 10 is a good job of taking these up to a high enough level that you can understand them as a developer and you can understand them as somebody sitting on the board. So you can come to the table and have something to discuss in a meaningful way. Now, it's not going to necessarily, at least not the list itself, right? It's not going to have a lot of details about what to do about those, but there's at least some understanding that, hey, we're facing an ever-evolving set of circumstances that we need to adjust to. So let's say we haven't deployed a training program for our developers, and let's say it was based off the OWASP Top 10 back in 2013, maybe 2017. That isn't necessarily going to be all good, box checked. That's not going to be something we can move forward with as is in perpetuity. It is an ever-changing landscape, and we need to be able to come back to the table on a periodic basis. I like the 3-year model, but hopefully you're doing that a little more often than that even. But the idea here is all parties have something to discuss. They know that the model's changing. And so when, as a cybersecurity professional, I am coming back and asking budgetary-wise for additional training dollars. Hey, I thought we were already doing this. We're doing this, right? But this isn't necessarily what our largest concerns are anymore. We need to talk about how this has changed and how these changes are affecting our environment specifically.
Great, thank you. And so, Aaron, is this similar to your approach as well, or do you experience anything different?
Yeah, no, I think that's not a lot to add there. I think the difference to me between good and great when it comes to security is or software security in particular, is teams that find a way to prioritize the top 10 and all the other security things. The top 10 to me is almost a prioritization foundation if you don't have one yet. But if you have one, obviously you want to follow that in your organization. But the thing that sets teams apart for me is not just the attention to the specific vulnerabilities or design flaws, but the attention to quality in their software and the ability to change their software, right? A meaningful bug can be either a quick fix or a month-long cycle, depending on how well the code is written, how well the code is tested, how well the code is updated and matured, and that constant ongoing investment, right? The carry cost of software in general. If you're constantly paying that and paying attention to it, I see software security teams able to adapt much faster. So I think, as kind of hinted at, that budgetary aspect, it's not just, paying for training, paying for education, but paying the constant and kind of ongoing investment in your software.
Got it. Makes sense. And so I think that prioritization is probably like a big thing that comes up as basically everyone's trying to make their business case, trying to get more funding, trying to decide where to invest in. And I know software security programs are multifaceted. There's so many there's so many different facets from that standpoint. So Matthias, as organizations who are maybe they've just started investing in software security programs and they're probably in their first few years in, how should they prioritize to really build a multifaceted and a robust security program for the developer teams?
Well, so the default question these days is, we need to shift more of the things left. We have to go all the way left. But the question is, how do you do that? Like it's easier said than done. I would say. I do see a journey. I do see a journey where people start with either they have an issue, they are hacked in the very unfortunate case, or there's something coming up in the organization that is trouble. And that's how quite often organizations get started. And hopefully most organizations already are started, and that happened 10, 15, 20 years ago, but something happened. Or, a competing company got hacked and they start to realize like, oh my God, maybe we have to do something as well. So the way they quite often start is they try to figure out, well, how many of these things do we have? There's one particular issue, we can fix it, but how many of these similar issues are there? And quite often the first thing that they do is they look manually, or they hire pen testers, and they look for more of the same things until they realize like, oh my God, maybe we should try to figure out how to automate stuff like that, in a fashion, in a static analysis fashion or a dynamic analysis fashion. And they try to automate the process, and they try to, they buy scanners, and ultimately they're able to harvest, unfortunately, all of those problems. Doesn't mean they are fixed, but at least they are aware of the problems in the code. So next they're like, well, oh my God, that's huge. So what I've seen 10 years ago is people said, what, let's baseline the application. To me, it's a silly concept where they say, we know of all the problems, let's not tackle them. Let's not make more problems. That's the first step. Let's not make more problems. So from now on, we will not make more problems. I think we've proven that we're not doing a good thing, because we're 20 years later and we're still making the same mistakes as the very first OWASP top 10 list. So we're not improving well enough. So we're shifting even more left. And what does that mean? Well, quite often we look at, well, who wrote actually these bits and bytes? Well, oh my gosh, the developer. Maybe we should talk to the developer. Maybe we should help the developer. Maybe we should try and figure out what we can do to make sure that on a day-to-day basis, the developer writes good code. But again, that is not, that's a good idea, but that doesn't mean you have solved the problem, because it takes people to, guide the other developers. And quite often there's not enough people to guide the developers. On average, there's one software security person per 100 developers. So highly outnumbered, right? So the magic trick over here, how do you start with that is, well, we need to be able to engage with the developer. We need to be able to broaden the knowledge and make sure that the application security person has something to guide 100 people in real time on a day-to-day basis, every day of the month, and be able to say, you know what, let me help you. How can that happen? Well, we all heard, hopefully, of a security champions program, which means like, hey, we are trying to figure out who are the best people, not the best people, who are the people with a keen interest in security, who are the developers with a keen interest in security, who have some social skills that can help the other developers. So the best way, I think, to start right now is trying to figure out how to come together with the security team and the developers and tackle that problem. And it all starts, in my mind, with the people. It all starts with really good collaboration between the security folks and the engineers, and trying to figure out, hey, how can we move this thing forward? Security is outnumbered. They need the engineers. The engineers own the code. It's just a matter of finding the people with a keen interest in security, nurturing them, helping them on a day-to-day basis. And that is, to me, that is how we start. It's unfortunately no longer with tools. It's really with the focus on the people and trying to figure out how can we help the people.
Got it. I think that's great. I think there's the combination of the developer enablement, and again, like the tools are only as effective as they can be if you don't have the right culture and the right kind of champions, I think, within the organization. So I think that's a great point. Ben, Aaron, anything to add there?
Yeah. In my experience, there's really three ways to drive this, and all comes down to what's going to drive this solution, right? They can come from, in my experience, three different ways. One, you can just have senior leadership within a company that just happens to have a security mindset, and there can be a top-down drive. That's great when it happens, but I don't want to call it unfortunate, because I mean, businesses are in business to make money, right? So they typically don't have that kind of drive at the top level. So where else do you look? Well, unfortunately, a lot of times it comes from a compliance audit report, right? Something comes back and some group with whom you're doing business, whether that's the government or another company, comes back and you get a bad review, you get a bad report. Well, something needs to change, right? And then typically it is still a top down, but not because of interest, but because of requirement. We got to keep this contract. We got to shape things up. We got to develop our security programs. Those top down approaches, they work, they're fine, but my favorite way is the third, which is more of a grassroots approach. If you can have a groundswell from your developers, from the people actually living the life, making the code, having an interest in security and looking to build up a program from the ground up, and reaching out to folks in the cybersecurity team and up in senior management and start to actually build that program from that way, I found you have a much better success long-term with something like that. Instead of it being a mandate, you're generating genuine interest. Instead of trying to foster unicorns, right? Developers who are have a security mindset, you're building them from the inside out, which is my favorite approach.
Yeah, for sure. I think, there are kind of three things that I think about when in a program. There's the awareness aspect, right? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? What's the purpose? There's the education component. How do we get better? How do we understand what these things are? And then there's the organizational support aspect, right? People being given the space and the effort and the budget to learn and to get better, right? If you don't tell people what's going on, why they're doing it, if you don't educate them to do better, and they don't give them the tools to do it, you're never going to get there, right? And very important as well to me is, which game are you playing? There's 4 games you can play, right? There's no game at all. There's checkers, there's chess, and there's Go, right? Security is a systems problem, a systems thinking problem. Always has been, always will be, right? You can play checkers, and that's the static analysis game, right? You'll get somewhere, but you're not going to get everywhere, right? You want to think about what's happening as your organization moves, right? You want to be thinking more 3-dimensional, I guess, in general. There's the chess aspect of having organizational support and really, moving in the right direction. And then there's the kind of meta game, right? And that's the Go level, right? It's the what are the whole possible outcomes that could come from my energy, my effort, my investment. That's where the full on risk modeling, threat modeling, building people instead of unicorns or teams instead of unicorns. That kind of holy grail approach comes into play for me.
Interesting. Yeah, I think those are all great points about kind of that establishing that culture, that security first culture for the developer teams, and how that will make things more successful. I do agree with Ben. I think sometimes like the top down, it might not be as successful because you don't get that sustained kind of impact. So it's like, how do you create something that is not just the one-time thing or the thing that you check in every quarter or so? How do you keep it as a consistent kind of play going on? Awesome. Great discussion here. So now I want to get a little bit back to the top 21 list from the OWASP perspective. I was always curious, so there's the top 10, but is there something that the OWASP list is not directly addressing if there'd be like an OWASP top 11 to 20 list or to 25 list? So kind of what comes up top of mind from your perspective. I'm going to do this popcorn style, go to Matthias, then go to Ben, then go to Aaron.
Oh, so my take on that one is probably different. So the OWASP top 10 is really web focused. I always find it interesting that other languages, let's say COBOL, there's no OWASP top 10 for COBOL, obviously. And there's still problems with COBOL, so we have to have a top 10. So first of all, language-specific stuff is very important. OWASP top 10, again, very good start, but it is definitely not language-specific. I think there's big differences within the languages itself, what the problems are over there. So it's not even beyond the top 10, which is actually your question. If we're going beyond the top 10, I'm a little bit more old school, if I can say that. Like back in the day when I was working on static analysis, I remember the days where we counted the number of categories, and there were roughly 700 different categories of problems that you could find. Were they all severe? No, absolutely not. But the combination of a couple of these low security incidents could actually lead to a hack as well. Okay, so is there more than the top 10? Absolutely, there's way more than the top 10, and it's good that the top. So to be fair over here, the top 10 is more than the top 10. It's a collection. So some of these items are really collections of problems. But there's definitely more. But I think the OWASP top 10 already covers some really, really good ground. If as a company you nail the OWASP top 10, I think you've done a really good job.
Yeah, I would agree. The OWASP top 10, again, to reiterate, for me, it's table stakes, right? We're talking about not something to build your security program on. And if you're doing this, then you're fine. You don't want to build it, shape it around this. But a well-built security program is going to do this stuff well as a side effect of doing security well, right? So it's a pretty good mile marker for testing how you're doing. If you're failing any of these, it's a pretty good sign that your security program needs to be shored up in a number of ways. You're not hitting those table stakes type of approach. Anything beyond that, the main source of what I look for beyond the top 10, and you can find more data in a number of places, but my favorites are look for current CVEs, right? What are the things currently being developed and pushed out in the wild, or that researchers have found and identified and brought to the various vendors, and make sure that you're shored up against those. So having a threat modeling and a research group, whether that's in-house or third-party out, that you stay up to date with, helps keep you on the cutting edge of what's new and what's a common threat out there. And of course, the other one is just knowing your own applications. Matthias said, well, there are plenty of things in every bit of every different application that are going to be different from other applications, right? Maybe not everything in the top 10 applies to you. And knowing where and what you might substitute in for maybe you'd say your top 10, if you want to go that route, is important too. But it starts at home with intelligence on the outside with CVE stuff, and intelligence on the inside with researching and understanding your own applications.
Yeah, and I think it's important to give OWASP credit where credit is due. They're much more than the top 10, right? OWASP produces cheat sheets. They produce, to varying degrees of maintenance, of course, but there are quite a few cheat sheets out there for certain frameworks, certain languages. They do expand on their effort. They do provide tooling. I know we're focused on the top 10, but it's important to me to just say, hey, there's a lot of work that goes into OWASP, the foundation in general. And it'd be good to just acknowledge that there's more stuff out there than just the top 10. That's just kind of scratching the surface. But if there's one thing that I wish is on the top 10, it's code quality. I will always beat this drum forever and ever and ever until I see it appear, because it doesn't matter if you have a SQL injection. To me, it matters how quickly you can respond to knowing that you have a SQL injection, right? The delta between knowing and being able to fix is more valuable to me than just knowing. And I think until we get out of the discovery mode and into the active maintenance and active fostering of how do we get there faster, we haven't won yet. Simple things that you can do to our code. And when I say static analysis here, I mean more program analysis than I mean security static analysis. Just things like cyclomatic complexity, code coverage, just like the real basic idea of like, what is my program doing and how easy is it to understand? I think simple stuff like that can go a really long way in discovering, what are the really nasty pockets, right? If you find the most dense, complicated, untested code in your program, it probably has the most bugs. Or even just look at your Git repository and say, how many times has this file been changed, right? Look for the highest churn. Things like that are indicators of quality issues. You don't even have to go looking very far to find them. But I think that kind of investment is the evolutionary step we need to take.
Okay. If I just may add one thing, I think that's a really good point that you're making, Aaron, because if the quality of the code is good, tools as well as people will do better in finding those problems. And you've touched on remediating problems, but it's also on the finding side. Static analysis solutions will do better on better written code. People will be able to resonate better on better written code. So it is not only on the fixing side that it's going to help, but also just on the finding side that is going to help.
Great. I think that's a great point. Thank you everyone for your perspectives on that. Kind of going to dial it back a little bit because we had talked about building secure coding programs, becoming security aware, and starting to build that developer upskilling program. So like for people that want to kind of like, start and take things in chunks in the journey, like kind of like, where should they start first? And then how should they measure success as well, kind of the program? Just would love to see your perspective on what you've seen in the past. Anyone can go. Matthias, Aaron, Ben. Everyone's like, that's a tough question.
Sure. No, I think about this a lot because I think, thinking about how to build a complete developer, right, from start to finish, there's a lot to consider. When it comes to software security, I'll start with quality, but I've already said that enough, so I'll put that down for a moment. Domain modeling, that's a really important concept as well. It's not preventing cross-site scripting or SQL injection that matters. It's what is the domain representation of what you need to do, and how close to it are you, right? You peel back all the layers of the frameworks and the methods and all the stuff. You have a thing to put on a page. You have a payment to put on a payment card network. You have a patient to record a medication for. You have a thing you're going to do, right? And when you strip away all the stuff, you still have this kind of business thing or this organizational tool, whatever it might be. Having people understand exactly what that thing does and what it's supposed to do. What are the invariants? What are the good parts and bad parts? What's correct? What's not correct? Right? Really getting down to what's the absolute algebra for expressing this domain thing, absent of technology, right? Building developers that can reason about that helps them reason about everything. Because when you have that business understanding, that domain understanding, you also know when to spot things that maybe don't make sense, right? There's so many security issues that are just logic problems, right? Just non-total logic, algebraic expression problems that are really hard to unpack. Because business is complicated and messy, right? Not everything fits into a nice state machine. Not everything fits into a nice expression. And those seams are where things go wrong and they go off the rails really quick. So teaching people how to really reason about the seams, how to really reason about the algebra of their business goes a really long way for me. And then once you have that, I find it a lot easier to teach why SQL injection is a problem, right? Because then you focus on the mechanics, or why cross-site scripting is a problem, or cross-site request forgery is a problem. And you can express it to them in terms of, oh, in my business, when I try to do X, here's the resulting action that happens, and what's the impact of the business, right? If this goes wrong, how much money does my company lose? Or how many lives does my company lose, right? It's, you reduce security, protect against loss of life and loss of money. That's it, right? If that's not the why, you're wrong, right? Those are the only two things which are reasons to really do security. So when you can relate it back to that, you can also help developers reason about what's important, right? When they hit that domain aspect that causes significant loss in the company, maybe they'll think a little harder too. Oh, maybe I should go ask somebody, even if they don't know. Oh, maybe I should go talk to somebody about this. This is really important to my company. Let me go find some experts so I know I don't mess that up, right? That to me, that curiosity, intuition, and being able to go find the help they need is kind of step one. And over time, they'll grow with investment.
Ooh, I was going to answer that one very different, Aaron. Like
that's awesome.
So so the way I think about it quite often, and maybe I'm wrong, but I do see developers that actually, they are more focused on themselves than on the business as a whole. And sorry for lack of a better word, but they do not care if the business is going to lose money or not. What they do quite often care about is also themselves. How am I? I am good. I want to be better, and how can I become better? And the analogy I always like to use, and if we just focus on the developer, him or herself, and not on the business itself, then I think there's a tight correlation between a good developer and a security savvy developer. And the way I look at it is a developer that starts coding, he or she makes simple mistakes, syntactical errors, oh my God, Java lines end with a semicolon. Okay, I'll do that, And then, they start to reason about applications. They figure out how functions work. They can put stuff in different files and it still works. And ultimately they go to, the architecture and the design of an application. And I think it's only at the end of their journey that they realize, like, oh my God, developers are doing the wrong thing. They were using functionality that I didn't program or that I unintentionally programmed, which led to a security problem. So it's only at the end of the journey that they start to realize stuff around security. So if I look at the developer, him or herself, what I would like to focus on is like, hey, if you want to be portrayed as a really good developer, well, start to code with quality and with security in mind, and you will be seen yourself in this world as a really good developer. So if regardless of the company, if we can focus on that developer, him or herself, if he or she can actually understand that a good developer is a security savvy developer, I think we can make some progress towards everybody rallying around security. Quite unintentional. They do it for themselves, but they want to do it because then they are seen as really good developers.
Couple of great answers. Tough to follow, but let's see what I can do. So, fairly tactical answers and focus on the individual. Let me take a swing at what you can do as an organization. There's an understanding that, or at least let's call it a misconception, actually, that adding security into your code is going to slow things down, make things worse. It's a cost to the overall way of doing things. As we look at this traditional shift left approach, though, if we add security earlier in the process, we find quite the opposite is true. I'm not saying anything groundbreaking here. This is known. What we tend to miss, though, as an organization, is the upfront investment in adopting a program like that. So if you have an agile program and you're constantly running sprints, have you even allowed your team time to take a step away from their active programming work to advance their programming capabilities through training, through something else? Or do you have them running at 100% or 110% and literally have no time to advance what they're doing, and it's just on to the next sprint? Understanding that things will slow down initially as you invest time and serious effort into building your developers to become better, more secure developers. But the gains over the long term will greatly outweigh that. So as an organization, if you really want to see this benefit, understand that there's going to be an upfront cost to performance, and accept that, embrace it, and welcome the improvements that you see as you take that leap with them.
I think that's great, and I love the fact that there were 3 very different answers, actually, like speaking from different perspectives. So you have your organization-wide perspective, like you have more of your AppSec perspective, and then you have your developer perspective as well. So it was very, very interesting to see the different answers. But I think what came out is there's still the need to have a program in place. The measurements on the program is going to vary, but I mean, it's still, at the end of the day, it is thinking about developing skills from a developer perspective. It's mitigating risk, and it's being able to show the impact to the business overall. So I think that's it's just kind of a great confluence of answers for us. So that actually answered a couple of our questions that we had from the audience. So I think we managed to anticipate what the audience is asking. I think overall this has been just such a great discussion, and I think we all agree that security is a challenge, and how organizations are taking that proactive stance is important, and that the OWASP list is a great baseline to start, but there's a lot more to consider, I think, when you consider the vulnerabilities, the evolving, the landscape, then also the change management and culture, aspect of it as well. So thank you again for this discussion. And for the audience, if there's any other questions, please do let us know, or please contact us at info@securecodewarrior.com. Ben, Matthias, Aaron, thank you again, and hope to see you next year, or for the next OWASP via list review as well. Thank you again. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.
Outstanding. Well, I would like to thank our panel for taking the time to be with us today. If there were questions we were not able to address, we will be sending those over to the folks at Secure Code Warrior, and they will get those answered for you after the webinar concludes. A quick reminder that today's session was recorded, so following the webinar, you'll receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand. You can also find the recording on the Security Boulevard website. Just visit securityboulevard.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section. It will be waiting for you. Now, to announce the 4 winners of our $25 gift card drawing. Our first winner is Felicity C. Congratulations, Felicity. Our second winner is Carl M. Congratulations, Carl. Our third winner is Davis K. Congratulations, Davis. And our fourth winner is Prince M. Congratulations, Prince, and our other 3 gift card winners. Aaron, Ben, and Matthias, again, thank you so much for taking the time to put together this presentation. And I would also like to thank you, our audience, for being with us for the entirety of today's presentation. This is Cody J. Brown signing off. Have a great day, everyone.